And then there was one point I will never forget, talk about an imprinted memory,
Mm.
where they actually had to restrain my father because
Wow.
I think he was going to actually go up after the judge.
Wow.
And so his bailiff steps over, lawyer grabs his arm, right? And you're just like, holy crap, right? So I'm out in the hallway now after this whole debacle is over. And basically my mom and my dad are still bickering about something. And that was the last time I saw my father again. So I saw him when I was 15. So that was like 1985, right? And then in 2019, I got a letter in the mail that said he died. And that was it. So that was my entire experience with my father, was either screaming matches. When he was around, he was great. He probably had some kind of bipolar or some sort of, something or other. I'm not a mental health professional like you are, Thomas. But really, when I think about that and I think about what I went through, that's really what drives me, right? I say, well, you know what? When people talk about divorce, and like you said, there's a lot they don't know, despite how common it is. People are always like, oh yeah, that's not going to happen to us. Oh yeah? Well, you're sitting across from someone who it happened to, because his parents didn't think that would happen, and it can happen really quickly. So that's what I try to bring to the table and say, guys, let's work it out in mediation. You're not going to be husband and wife anymore. You're still going to be mom and dad. Your kids are counting on you. They don't care about what's going on between you. They want you at the soccer games and the high school graduation, because I didn't have that. And so we try to use that as the message to get them to come to the table and really, go through the divorce in the best way for their kids.
Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with Thomas Miller. Are you tired of your tweens, teens, and young adults' negative behaviors and poor choices holding you emotionally hostage, controlling your family, and ruling your life? If you answered yes, then you are in the right place. This podcast is a community for courageous parents just like you, who come here to gain effective tools, skills, and take action so they can change their tween, teen, or young adult's life and improve their family's future. Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with your host, Thomas Miller. Super excited to have with me today Joe Dillon, who is a pioneer in divorce mediation and who has been helping couples navigate the end of their marriage with dignity and financial wisdom for over 17 years. Today's topic, if you couldn't figure out, is going to be about divorce and mediation, and obviously how to help usher a family through that with dignity in the most effective way, and obviously with a mind toward, of course, children and family wellness. I want to continue with a little bit more of his bio because it's super impressive. We're super happy to have him on the show. He is the co-founder of Equitable Mediation Services. He combines his MBA in finance with specialized training from Harvard, MIT, and Northwestern University to guide couples toward agreements that protect both their emotional well-being and financial futures. He's also pioneered virtual divorce in 2011. With nearly a decade before others adopted online practices during the pandemic. His results speak for themselves, and he's just a super awesome person as well, who has a great bedside manner. I can attest to it in our previous conversations and work together, and just super happy and welcome to the show, Joe. Really, really great to have you.
Glad to be here, Thomas. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So we had a previous guest talked about blending families and how challenging that can be. We haven't had anyone talk about divorce. So I'm so excited that we're here to talk about divorce and mediation. And of course, you'll have plenty of time during this interview to talk about, your services and what you do, and, some basic things that feels like, even though divorce has been around for a while, right? It's not a new concept. It's still amazing to me as a person who, of course, works every single day with families and coaches parents, that parents sometimes forget the impact, right? And I think as we were talking offline, divorce has been so normalized. You would know, what is it, 6% now? What is it?
Yeah, right. Especially in baby boomers and older
Yep.
couples, it's probably approaching 75%. Yeah, absolutely.
75. So even though it is normalized, and in no way, shape, or form am I, as a licensed, therapist, saying that if you're getting divorced, your kids are going to be living under a bridge with 17 cats in a trailer. That's obviously not going to happen. But it is amazing to me that people forget that everything has ripples and everything affects right, children, and particularly depending upon the age and the time and what's going on. And you have an amazing personal story and a personal, I think, why as to, what got you into this space. And I love that you come at this, of course, from trying to protect folks and support them and think about, how to do this in the most effective, deleterious way toward the family, but also financially prudent. But speak a little bit, if you don't mind, about, what got you in this space and in this industry. And I think it informs how you practice. It's such a great lens that I think you come back to as a North Star.
Yeah, thanks. So the story for me is, my parents litigated their divorce, right? And as a child of divorce and also in a household where there were loud explosions of arguments and then silence for months, right? Like not a day, like we're talking months. And it was such a dysfunctional pattern. It was peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. And so what wound up happening was, my folks just had no ability to communicate with each other. They hired lawyers. They did everything you shouldn't do. Spend all your money. I was finding myself sitting in the back of a courtroom watching my parents argue, all those kinds of things. And so, when I see that, what wound up happening was the last vision I have of my father, I was, I believe, probably 15 or probably 16. They were arguing over who was going to pay for me to go to college. And he was wanted to be 50-50. And I think at that point, my dad, made probably at least 10 times more than my mom did. She was working inside the home with me, and she had gotten a part-time job because she had an inkling something was going on. But if she was making $5,000 or $6,000 a year, that'd be a lot. And so he was really upset. The judge is like, well, Mr. Dillon, you make a lot more. You should pay more. And so every time my father would start yelling at the judge is like 60-40. And then my father would start yelling at the judge more 70-30. And then there was one point I will never forget. Talk about an imprinted memory
Mm,
where they actually had to restrain my father because I
wow.
think he was going to actually go up after the judge.
Wow.
And so his bailiff steps over, lawyer grabs his arm, right? And you're just like, holy crap, right? So I'm out in the hallway now after this whole debacle is over. And basically my mom and my dad are still bickering about something. And that was the last time I saw my father again. So I saw him when I was 15. So that was like 1985,
Oof.
right? And then in 2019, I got a letter in the mail that said he died. And that
Mm,
was it. So that was my entire experience with my father was either screaming matches. When he was around, he was great. He probably had some kind of bipolar or some
mm,
sort of, something or other. I'm not a mental health professional like you are,
mm,
Thomas. But really, when I think about that and I think about what I went through, that's really what drives me, right? I
mm-hmm,
say, well, you know what? When people talk about divorce, and like you said, there's a lot they don't know, despite how common it is. People are always like, oh, yeah, that's not going to happen to us. Oh, yeah.
mm-hmm,
Well, you're sitting across from someone who it happened to because, his parents didn't think that would happen, and it can happen really quickly. So that's what I try to bring to the table and say, guys, let's work it out in mediation. You're not going to be husband and wife anymore. You're still going to be mom and dad. Your kids are counting on you. They don't care about what's going on between you. They want you at the soccer games and the high school graduation because I didn't have that. And so we try to use that as the message to get them to come to the table and really, go through the divorce in the best way for their kids. So that's my sad but true backstory.
Well,
So
I mean, I need to hold space first off because I'm a therapist for just that very vulnerable and deep share, and I really appreciate that. And I heard your story before, but it is still every time I hear it, it's amazing how you could say something and it may or may not still resonate with you, or it may evoke certain feelings, experiences. But that was a trauma, and
yeah,
what people forget sometimes, when they're in something, because there's the cortisol bath that we're in when we're going through that fight or flight, is that you do have, some form of PTSD at that time. I'm not saying you have that
yeah,
now. And I
right,
think
yeah,
that's really important. If you actually look at the diagnosis, this is kind of a quick tangent, but it's a really crummy diagnosis because it says must have been in a life threatening event or have
right,
witnessed,
yeah,
a life
right,
threatening event where basically your life, is hangs in the balance. And that makes a lot of sense if you're in Afghanistan. But if you're a mother, I always use this analogy. If you're a mother which I have many mothers like this. I have a mom right now I'm coaching who's in the program who unfortunately has Narcan her son. That's an opiate blocker that you spray in someone's nose to prevent the uptake of opiates 7 times. You know, she's
Oh,
by
geez.
proxy has, right, PTSD. She's more in the acute phase because he's still in and out, and we're doing some great work, and she's doing amazing with being able to communicate in a heart-centered way, but also hold boundaries and really try to create a culture that's going to net recovery for him. But for you in that moment, that was your world was crashing. And I think what's amazing to me, like you're saying about all these parents or clients who are like, no, 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 this is not going to be us. And then you see
Hmm.
how quickly that devolves. And it's funny that you are a lawyer, and it sounded like you were about to make a lawyer joke or something in there about how the lawyers came in and your family, you know, and took the money and all that. I mean, that stuff is there's emotional distance. I could tell, of course, when you tell that story, but it must be such a driver for you, right? Because you still see these families fall into some of these same traps. You know, speak to maybe what are some of the basic traps or holes in the sidewalk that you know and you see it, and it must be difficult to, right, to try not to shake someone and yell and scream at them, so to speak. But what are some of those traps that you see parents and or families falling into that could otherwise be circumnavigated?
Yeah, there's a couple that immediately come to mind, right? One is the concept of modeling. And I tell this story, it's about a friend and it's not about divorce, but it will totally resonate with you. And it rings true with any parent, right? I said, basically, if you want, some news to travel fast, basically tell a 3-year-old, right? It's
Mm-hmm,
like if you
mm-hmm,
say, I want you to keep this a secret. So this goes
mm-hmm,
back to a friend of mine, over at his house for dinner, just kind of hanging out in the living room. He's got a little boy, probably about 3, and my friend is in the kitchen, and invariably something's going on in there. The meal isn't going well, and he blurts out the F word, right? And because he must have gotten burned or hurt or something. For probably the next 5 to 10 minutes, his son just thought this was the funniest thing and ran around the house, F, 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 right? Now, had no idea what he was saying, right? But it was getting a reaction, right? So the message here is that even if the kids don't understand what's going on, they're absorbing it. And as parents, you have to be very cognizant of your behavior around your kids. So fighting in front of them or disparaging them or talking about money and, I'm not going to pay you child support or alimony or things like that, right? So that's a big one. Another one is that, when we think about it, is that as kids get older, especially, right, one of the misnomers is that we stayed together for the kids. And that is just such a misnomer, right? Because as the kids get older, and I can tell you this from my own experience, I remember my mom, she's crying hysterically. My dad is pulling away in his car, packed with stuff. And she just over and over saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And I remember saying to her, I was like, what are you sorry about? Thank God this is over. I don't have to listen to this anymore. And then she looks at me like, you knew what was going on. I'm like, what do you think? Why do you think I was hiding in a closet? Because you guys were screaming so loud, right? Like, so parents, you're not so clever, guys. Really, you're not. Your kids know what's going on. They know you're unhappy. And so it's best, in my opinion, to go your separate ways if you're not willing to put in the work to fix it. That being said, if you're going through a divorce, I'm not pro divorce. I'm anti conflict, right?
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
I'm always saying, look, try and save your marriage first, right? There's things you can do. There's professionals you can talk to, right? And if it turns out that you find through all that work that you're still unable to connect, no problem. But in your world, and I think Thomas, what you do, it's perfect, right? Is that when you're going through such an event like this, bring in other professionals, right? When you're going through a divorce with kids, you don't know what you're doing, right? Most of our clients have never been divorced before. I think maybe I could count on one hand how many have been previously divorced when they come to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you need help, lean into professionals like you, like others to say, I'm going through this divorce. My kid is reacting to it negatively, especially teenagers, right? Because they're in that all about me phase, right? You're ruining my life. And so that's what I kind of bring to that table. And I say, these are the things you all have to be aware of because somewhere along the line, and we were teasing about this, we were talking about this before offline. It's like somewhere along the line, we grew up, we became adults, we're supposed to be responsible, we're
Right.
supposed to help others, right? We can't just ride our bikes all summer or go hang out with our friends,
Right.
right? And so that's the role that you now signed up for, whether you realize it or not. So you need to act like it. So that's the message to parents. Be a parent, be an adult. Your kids need you. You think you're suffering, they're suffering 10 times as much as you do, and they might not have the vocabulary to say it. So that's what I would share.
Amen. I give you like an honorary master's in social work.
Thank you.
Base.
Thank you.
No, seriously. I mean, so you described so many things, but one thing I talk about a lot on this podcast, and definitely is in the Four Peaks Parents Program. The first peak is called the family audit, which is all about where the hell are we, and we look systemically at what are the
Yeah.
dynamics and patterns that are probably driving the disease. It's all about core issues in that first peak, and the families have to go through a whole series of looking at basically the strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities and threats that exist in their system. And one of the things I hear you saying, which is so true, you said it better than I'm about to say, because I'm going to use some psychobabble, but there's a parallel process of dysfunction, right? So as the family is yelling, screaming, fighting, by proxy, right, the child is vis-a-vis absorbing all that and becoming a saturated sponge to the point that to survive, right, and to cope, you said you were hiding in the closet, right, and that idea of also not knowing. And your mother sounds like an amazing woman, by the way, a very resilient woman. However,
Yeah.
she was quasi autistic, as so many parents are, because when they're in their fight or flight, and the cortisol is kicking and the adrenaline, right? You literally, we know from trauma, you lose peripheral vision, right? You're so focused. That's why they put blinders on horses in a horse race, so they just run forward. And so those families are running whatever the hell race they think they're running, which is not an intentional one, and they're not seeing, right, the child that's on either side of them. It reminds me a lot of this family I started working with, who's in the program, and the father is still definitely, I would say, an alcoholic, but I got him to accept he has a problematic relationship with alcohol. So that's
Yeah. That's a
the
start.
easier tag, right? However,
Correct. Yep.
he's in the program because his daughter is struggling with a whole bunch of things, and understandably, his own hypocrisy is getting in the way from his action. And it was
Yeah.
interesting. He said when we were doing one of the sessions, he and the wife were kind of talking about the etiology, the origin of his drinking and when it began. And he's like, well, it really hasn't affected the kids. And I was like, literally, I met your daughter, and your
Oh,
daughter said, this is a true story. She goes, I found a nip, which is those little small bottles,
yeah,
right?
of course.
In case you don't know, little small bottles in her Lego bin as a child. So I'm like, there's
Oh
there's
boy.
definitely there's definitely a
Yeah,
legacy
there's
here, right?
definitely,
So
we're aware of this,
right,
Dad.
right.
Yeah.
So I think what is so hard for parents, having worked with parents through some of the most acrimonious divorces, and I'm coming in to coach them and to keep saying, I know that you're sharpening your sword, or you're putting on those boxing gloves, but there is a child in the corner. And even I've had to work with guardian ad litems because to help, right, be
Yeah.
this again true objective resource for the court system about what ostensibly is the
Right.
next
Of
best
course.
thing. And I've even been in situations which are horrible, where a child needed a therapeutic boarding school, an inpatient, an intensive outpatient, or outpatient, some form of treatment. And because the family was so at loggerheads, they were acting out vis-a-vis the child. And it's brutal to watch, because symptomatology, it's the same thing I say with the Four Peaks program whenever I'm on a discovery call, is I always say there's an ROI for inaction and there's an ROI for action. So, and
Absolutely.
they're
Yeah.
vectors that move farther and farther away from each other. And the cost of inaction only allows symptomatology to really get deeper and deeper. And it has even more of a physical, emotional, financial toll. So how do you sell people away from that? I mean, to me, it's so obvious, because I'm not, thankfully, in the midst of a really angry divorce, that I'm not, grinding my axe here. That I think financially, it's the most obvious thing. Emotionally, it's the most obvious thing. Physiologically, right, as well. I mean, and please throw out some stats if you want. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't the average divorce, what is it, a year and a half?
Yeah. I mean, if you use lawyers, probably between, yeah, 2 to 3 years.
Oh,
And
oh,
yeah, and if it's a friendly lawyer driven divorce, 18 to 8 to 14 months. And that's a lot of that is a lot of waiting around, a lot of
yep,
uncertainty, a lot of back and
yep,
forth, right? Ping ponging.
yep,
Mediation, maybe 3 months.
yep.
right? So, you say to yourself, and I think when I love that ROI, right, on action and inaction, is that when you also think about it, right? I think of it in terms of your return on investment. Now, I have an MBA in finance, right? So my background is finance negotiation, right? And one of the things that people, when you think about it from in my space, right, we think of retirement savings or interest rates or,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the stock market's doing, right? And those hardcore numbers. But there's emotional capital that also gets spent. And, we were talking a little bit about this before we got on, is that in this day and age, I was having this conversation, I swear to you, last night with my wife at dinner. I said, I said, I'm a really, glasses not only half full, the glass is completely full kind of
Mm-hmm.
guy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm Rotary and I volunteer and
Mm-hmm.
I do all this like positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I really believe that. I said, but man, it seems like every single day it's really hard to get up and be positive and be motivated with the constant influx of the fire hose of bad news that's
Mm-hmm.
coming our way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am the most apolitical guy
Me
you'll
too.
meet. I'll
Yeah.
vote for anybody. It doesn't matter. But it's just the sheer volume of noise that's coming at us, right? And so now you take that noise, right? And now you've just drained the life out of someone and you put them in this divorce situation where they need to tap into every emotional reserve they've got. The well is dry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we talk about money in divorce, I also posit it as emotional capital. What's in your emotional bank? Because if you want to go through a litigated divorce and you're already on zero, you're not going to survive that. And I've watched it. I've had family members go through it. And again, not being a clinical practitioner like you, but if you're basically taking one pill to calm you the minute you wake
Mm-hmm.
up, then another pill at night to
Mm-hmm.
go to
Mm-hmm.
bed because you're going through a litigated divorce, shouldn't that tell you something, right? And that's where you try to get people to wrap their brain around and say, look, there is an alternative. You know what it is. I know what it is. They make movies about it, right? How terrible it is. So let's avoid that. Let's recharge your batteries. Let's put some cash back in your emotional and your figurative and literal bank. And, most of our clients, so and if I had to guess, most of our clients average 45 to 55 years old, right? Somewhere in that zone. Now, I don't know about you, but I plan on living to 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm going to live forever.
Nice.
But if you say to these people, well, listen, say you're 50, and let's say you might not live to 96. Let's say you live to 90. Do you really want to be miserable for the next 40 years? No, right? You want to get through this, begin your healing process, which is an important
Mm-hmm.
step in this.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go through hell before you get to heaven, as Steve Miller would say. And you've got to get in there and start that healing process. And the sooner you can get to that, the sooner you can get on with your life and you can rebuild. So that's how we try to keep people in mediation and say, look, I'm going to still sleep at night. I'll think of you fondly. I'll be very sad if you don't finish mediation. It's entirely up to you, right? I don't beg, I don't plead. But you are in charge of your own destiny here. You know the alternative. What do you want to do? And in my experience has shown me, and you probably can relate to this, is people know when they're being difficult.
Mm-hmm.
People know the
Mm-hmm.
difference between right and wrong, unless you're raised by wolves, like, you get people, they're arguing with you and they're like, yeah, okay, let's just
Yeah.
go. And that's fine. If I can just get them to go, fine, let's just go. That's a victory in my book,
Mm-hmm.
right? Even though I quietly know I
Mm-hmm.
got them, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to gloat about it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the number that jumped out for me, there's tons of wisdom there, and I really appreciate all that education. But the 2 to 3 years you said of divorce, I mean, the first thing I thought of was the child, right? Because that's always where I go, right? Family wellness, right? And always trying to help families build a culture that nets out a healthy, resilient, right, independent kiddo. And I have so many families right now, unfortunately, with the failing to launch 20 something, right? Where when you go
Yeah.
back in the story, there was moments of the 2 to 3 years and everyone's blaming everything on COVID still. And there is value or veracity on some level to, of course, COVID was a pause button in people's development, but it's all about our responsiveness and what did we do. And I just think of, if let's say you have a child doesn't even have any organic predisposition toward mental health, um, just 2 to 3 years, like you mentioned, high schoolers who are
Yeah.
egocentric and all they want is for you to kind of be wallpaper and you know and give them
Right.
maybe a ride here and there and some money and kind of stay out of their lives. They don't want the tectonic plates underneath their feet moving, right? They want
Yeah.
as a consistent, let's say, situation as possible. Same thing with tweens and teens, of course, right? I always say this quote, the parents who are being permissive, I always say, how do you not see that your kids are pushing up against the wall looking for the edge? They want to find the edge of where they end and you begin. And when you recede, they're going to continue, right? As parents keep overindulging and being permissive and not holding a healthy frame, not a
Yeah.
micro, snow globe or putting a kid in bubble wrap, but an appropriate developmental frame. 2 to 3 years of a parent, let's just even say, again, forget there's mental health, just a neurotypical, child with no real risk factors. How are you able to even just hold space and be an attachment-based mom or dad if you're fighting for 2 to 3 years? There's no way. That in of itself creates a neglect. That in of itself, creates a parental alienation. You add on top of that 2, 3 years, if a child, let's say, has OCD, has anxiety, has depression, is
Yeah.
possibly starting to experiment with substances, which now becomes regular or enters into abuse pattern. And I just see it all the time. I mean, the previous guest prior to you was a woman who's an expert in eating disorders, and she talked about the stealthy nature of it and how insidious
Yeah.
they are, and how by the
Exactly.
time the parents wake up to the disease, they're
Right.
years behind where the disease is. So
Yep.
if you're fighting, which I see all the time, these families, that it's so funny. I keep saying, we have to meet at the your child, that we're here to focus on your child, right? I must say that again and
Mhm.
again, at least every day. You can have your divorce in the background, but we have to come. This is the North Star. So again, to me, it's such a no-brainer. And what do you find is eventually the breaking point where someone is able to, whatever that is that eat humble pie, is that come to their senses, is that recognize the child, the family, themselves are at stake? I mean, what creates that shift?
Yeah. So I think as a negotiator, right? So one of the things that you learn about being a professional negotiator is that there's a reason negotiation is taught using game theory, right? And that's an important word in this case,
Hmm.
game.
Hmm.
And it's not meant to imply that divorce is a game or any of that by no stretch of the imagination. But there is a game behind it.
Hmm.
There is theory behind it. There is human nature
Hmm.
behind it. And, I love reading about this stuff
Hmm.
because it is all mind
Hmm.
bending,
Hmm.
psycho stuff,
Hmm.
right? And, not that I
Are you the
appreciate
are
my
you the
author.
last airbender, Joe? Is that what's happening?
I could be, yes, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I'll go into a golden
There
glow in
you
a
go.
moment for your listeners who can't see me. But what happens is, right, you see all of the logic goes out the window, right? When we're arguing and we're in that heat of the moment, we're trying to, our slings and arrows, right? We're trying to inflict pain on the other person. And the way we do that is by you statements, right? We're pointing the fingers and we're hurling our grenades. You did this, you did this, where, whether it's deflection or not. And the moment where the real breakthrough comes is when the gears shift and it moves from you to I. And that's really a key takeaway here in a negotiation, right? Is that I see when I see conflict and when couples are going after it, and I'll give you a perfect example. This happens in the alimony conversation a lot, right? So typically you've got this situation where you've got, and I like to put it this way because I truly believe this: one person works outside the home and one person works inside the home,
Mm.
right? They're not a stay-at-home parent. They're not watching TV all day and eating, ice cream, right? They're working harder than the other person and they're not getting paid for it, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they're really getting the short raw end of the deal, right? That was my mom for a long time, and putting up with all my nonsense.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, right, it's like a lot of times with alimony, it's like, well, you stayed home while I worked, right? So, and the other person said, well, wait a minute, we decided that I was going to stay
Mhm.
home, and that goes back and forth. Well, you, and then this is the moment in this conversation, for example, and they happen in all topics. Then when the person says, do you really think that I want your money? I want to take your money. I am happy about getting alimony. and the other person is kind of taken aback
Mm-hmm.
because they're thinking the whole time they're just throwing their grenades, right? And then they're shocked to hear that they're like, and they're if I could, I wouldn't take a penny from you. And that's like a good example of where the conversation shifts because it goes from you to I. And those are the moments where you have the space for reflection and you have the ability to say, I have a hand in this. I am partly responsible for this. I am fallible. I am
Mm-hmm.
human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the moments that we're looking
Mm-hmm.
for in a variety of
Mm-hmm.
topics. So rather than saying, well, you're never home, you're not a good parent, with parenting plans, say, listen, I appreciate all you've done. I know how hard you work. I don't know if it's realistic for you to get home, because we live in, Princeton, New Jersey, and you work in New York City, and you want to pick the kids up from school at 3:30. I don't see how that's realistic, despite how much I know you want that, right? It's how you shift the conversation to keep the temperature down. That's really what I got. Yeah.
Right. It's amazing how parallel our lives are because,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
no, no, seriously. I mean, I can't, I just went through this the other day with a family where, again, they're part of the program. The child has OCD. Little quick PSA and OCD is don't accommodate your child. Anyone listening, there is a previous episode way back when. It's called Stop Accommodating Your Kid, because every time you accommodate, right, it seeds ground to basically the obsessionality, and you become the compulsion that the child will create this reciprocal loop around. And so don't accommodate. However, this father, similar to what you just said, is wanting to have like a midweek dinner. And I completely understand where his heart is at. I understand that he wants to be more attachment based and put those deposits in the present bank, and that's beautiful. However, it involves picking the kids up, upsetting a complete apple cart in the flow of their evening, dragging them, somewhere more often than not closer to where he's at, because he wants to have it be like at the house and have some fit. The whole thing is creating so much tumult. So it's amazing how, again, like you said, when folks are able to kind of disarm this process, and I love that idea of you're basically teaching people how to look at the other person from a perspective taking lens. How can I, right, kind of put myself in their shoes or be where that person's at, and to move from viewing them completely as an adversary who's trying to take my money to actually having some empathy or compassion, and then
Right.
again seeing the child, if you will, right? I think that that's so important, is like, how do you see the child? I've done that for years with folks around their own recovery journey, is, can you see the impact, right? You walk into that package store or that liquor store. Yes, it's a brain disease, totally get it. This is not the podcast on addiction. However, it's not as easy as saying no. I understand all that. However, can we see the impact? Can we see the ripples, right? Can we see, that push pull, and kids getting caught in the middle? And I think what's hard for families, especially when you have, let's say, a child, it could be a toddler, a tween, a teen, or a tween, teen, and 20 something. They're all going to have different developmental perspectives on this. The older adult is off to college and is like, whatever, you know what I mean? And that's actually not unhealthy. That's actually very healthy for them to be that individuated and egocentric, where this, it's, I think, must be so hard for you to help families look at all of those layers, because there's so many layers, right? And again, they're coming at it, like you said, from such a myopic lens. So the work you're doing is so valuable, and it really is changing, the experience of these children and the family. And to come back to your experience, that you've unpacked in a millisecond, but I'm sure that took a lot of unpacking, and you probably,
20 years, quite frankly, to unpack fully.
and kudos to you. I mean, one of the things I heard in your story, which is just brilliant, and I'm going to compare you to the Dalai Lama for a hot second. And
Wow, there you
yeah,
go.
yeah,
Airbender of Dalai
yeah,
Lama.
you could use this later with your partner. So I read in his book that he has this practice where he faces China. Okay, just listen to this. He faces China every morning, and he tries to absorb their pain. which is like
Oh,
an amazing thing. And I'm not laughing at him. I'm just laughing at
wow.
the level of like servant leadership that I'm gonna like take on the pain of a continent, and
Yeah.
in essence try to liberate them. And I think that's on some level what your work is. And the fact that you went through this really barren landscape of connection with your dad, and you went through this very ascetic, autistic, lacking child developmental approaches in terms of your relational dynamic with him, and then to go into that same field where you had these people that were doesn't sound like had any understanding, and now to bring that far, I mean, what a huge gift. What a huge gift that you're doing.
It's interesting. It's like almost like my penance, right? It's like you feel like,
Seven Hail
okay,
Marys and
yeah,
42 years
exactly.
of
Right. Yeah. I'm
mediation.
recovering Catholic here. So,
Yeah.
but like you said, right, I think a lot of it too is that, earlier on in my career when I was doing mediation, there was a part of me that was, I guess, I don't want to say upset about it, but it was hard to learn how to compartmentalize that because it felt like, you'd see these folks and you'd wonder why they're getting divorced, and you were disappointed that they were getting a divorce because at some point in their relationship they loved each other. They maybe stood up in front of lots of friends and
Hmm.
family and professed their undying admiration for each
Hmm.
other, right? But then after a while, I started to realize that I said, you know what, I'm helping them avoid the meat grinder.
Yeah.
If they're going to do this, I'd rather they do that with me anyway. And you said this before, and it sounds like you and I are in very parallel paths in this regard. It's the whole Buddhist thing of when you throw a stone in the pond, it's a number of ripples,
Hmm.
right? And there are ripples that I feel like that these parents that I'm helping divorce, their kids are going to benefit from this,
100%.
right? Kids right down the road because they're going to have seen their folks model healthy disagreement. And honestly, again, apolitical, but I think that's what we're seeing a lot of today is the inability to disagree with each other as intellectual, right, normal thinking people. I'm
Hmm.
not going to agree with
Sure.
everybody.
Sure.
We live amongst different folks of different backgrounds, different cultures, even in a relationship, right? Marriages, they come at it from different spaces. But if you can respect that person, then you have a shot at staying together. And if you can't, at least respect them through the divorce
Hmm.
process, right? Say, look, we're different beings. It didn't work out. We have this great kid or kids, right? Like you said, we see them in these various age groups. Let's model a healthy behavior for them. Let's model, quite frankly, adulthood, right?
Hmm.
We can agree to
Hmm.
disagree. We can fight nicely. We can end this peacefully. And so, like, I remember this is, not to pile on the sad stories, but we had a graduation when I was living in New Jersey, and the weather was sketchy. And so the way it worked was you got two tickets if it had to be held in the gym, right? So only mom and dad could come. But if it was nice weather and it was going to be out on the football field, everybody could come, right? Because we had a football stadium. And the weather was sketchy right up until like the day before. And I remember my mom sent a ticket to my dad and said, please come to the graduation, and he would not come unless my mom also gave him a ticket for his girlfriend. And she explained that you only get two tickets because if it rains, it's in the gym. And I went to a small high school, like 197 kids or something, right? And he did not come. And you're like, and meanwhile, then the worst part was it was actually held outside.
Of course.
So he and his girlfriend could have come and he didn't come. And you're just like, what the hell, man? Like,
Yep.
as an adult, you're like, really? How emotionally immature are you? Right? What are you, five? Like, like, so that's the stuff that I've worked to process over my lifetime. And then when I look at people and I share these kinds of stories with them, and I get them to look in the mirror, right? It's like, again, I'm not a therapist, but I say, guys, take a real hard look at yourself. Do you really think, like, what if your kid was sitting here right now listening to the two of you? What do you think they would say to you two, right? Would they say, why did you knock it off?
Hmm.
That's probably what I would if I was your 12-year-old. Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean this sincerely. What you're saying can sound, I don't know, far-fetched or something about
Yeah.
positive impact, right, into the kids and then their kids, but you are playing a role in either creating generational trauma or not as a parent going through this. And for you to have the expertise, the objectivity, the professional know-how, the sensitivity, the connection vis-a-vis your own experience to stand inside everyone's shoes, because that's one thing I used to, oh my God, for years. I actually miss supervising young clinicians. It's really fun. I should probably mentor somebody. Side note, ADHD thought, sorry, shower thought. But I used to always say to the clinicians that I'd supervise, like, who the hell's the client here? And if it's a couple, the couple's the client. If it's a family, the
Mhm.
family's the client. It's not said individual, right? And that's very hard to do as a clinician or a mediator. I used to always say, is another thing. It's like Listerine, right? Or mouthwash. You gargle with it, you spit it out, but there's still a flavor. And your job is to gargle kind of the worldview of everyone in that room. And you can't just kind of gargle one person's perspective or point of view. You have to really kind of sit inside that cumulative, right? Let's say mouthwash.
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
taste
Yep.
of it? And then use yourself to be like, what does it feel like to be a kid in this family, or to be the husband of or the wife of? You do that so well. And again, it's a no-brainer to me that folks would mediate over divorce because of, like we talked about, putting a child on a shelf for 2 to 3 years, even if it
Mhm.
is uh, better than acrimonious. It's still such
Right.
a long time, and the child is held, like you said, in almost animated suspension, or suspended animation, and they're not able to hit the play button, which is what is actually healthy. They need to hit the play button and continue to move through. And I love that you could speak, such a vulnerable way about your own experiences and use that without, obviously, like you said earlier, maybe the pain was so closer to the surface than it is now. And now
Yeah.
you can use that in a really professional way to really guide. If we were to kind of summarize, what would you say is just one major message bullet point that you really want to get across to the listeners or anyone out there that's going through or potentially going through a divorce, and to really try to help them think more prudently about that?
I'd say, without a doubt, your kids are a lot smarter than you give them credit for. 100%. I don't care how old they are. I don't care if you think they've got their earbuds
Hmm.
in or they're
Hmm.
buried down in their Instagram or their TikTok. They are listening, they are absorbing, they are sponging. So every move you make, every word you say, they are absorbing. So be very careful with your choices and actions. Be very intentional.
I love that. And I think, just to add one thing on top of that, and I've shared a lot of my own amazing brilliance as a father, as well as a bazillion and one mistakes, is there's a episode way back when, it was called Tear and Repair, which was kind of like a therapy session for me. I was talking a lot about my oldest. And believe it or not, when you tear, as in, you slip into a dysregulated, let's call it parenting moment, where you're not parenting from a place of regulation, calm. I call it insularity, like having a layer of
Yeah.
insulation between
Yep. Yep.
yourself and your button board, and this PhD button pushing
Button board. I
child.
love that.
I always say every teenager has a PhD in button pushing. When you slip into that, you can always repair. And a Millerism or a Thomism that is said probably every day in this household is like, let's just start this morning again, over, or let's start this afternoon. So I just want parents to hear, before they pick up the shame stick or the guilt stick, there's something you could do today that will actually sow seeds of attachment and actually begin to change the trajectory of that, let's say, trauma pathway versus right health and wellness pathway. And I can't endorse you more. If any family out there is contemplating divorce versus mediation, or in the midst of it, Joe, it's so obvious, the value that he clearly displayed throughout this interview, as well as, of course, has a huge heart and is obviously an expert. Please speak to a couple of things that I think are really unique. In addition to you, you created the internet. Sounds like you and Al Gore created the
I
internet.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Al and I, we go way back. Yeah, absolutely.
But
Yep.
in addition to the
After, yeah.
virtual, speak
Yeah.
really quickly about, you have a bunch of sites throughout the country, which is super impressive. And then how can folks reach out to you if they want to?
Yeah, so we've been practicing online mediation since 2011, and that's allowed us to practice in multiple states. So one of the things that my wife and we've moved across the country, and without having to have a physical presence, we've developed such a process now that it actually, in our opinion, works better than sometimes being in a room because, as we talked
Makes
about it, right?
sense.
Sometimes people have dysregulated emotions, and being in this space makes them feel a little safer. They can take the call together or they can take it in separate spaces, and that allows for more free communication. So the best way to find us is really our website, which is equitablemediation.com. If you go there, you'll see we have this learning center where I've been blogging for 17 years and writing articles, and we have videos and courses and podcasts and things like that. We do practice in multiple states. So I'm originally from the New York City area, so New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, course. Then when we lived in Chicago, so we practiced in Illinois. Now we live in California, so we practice in California. And since my wife is a big Seattle grunge fan, so we also practice in Washington State.
That's
So we
awesome.
practice in those 6 states. We've actually, it's funny, we've done divorces in 13 states, Canada, France, Thailand, Hong Kong, Japan. People have found us because, and it's a testament to them, I think, is that they like our approach, right? They like this, yes, very analytical approach because we're going to prove it out with the numbers, but also, as we've been talking about, Thomas, the family-centered approach, the parent-centered approach, right? Because you don't want this to turn into some big conflagration. You want it to be a divorce, not a disaster, right? And so we try to help people with that. And really, if we have a free info call, you can go to our website, book a call with my partner, who's also my wife, Cheryl. She's a divorce coach. So, like you, we really believe in handling the entire client, right? The emotional aspect, the tactical, financial, legal. And so just reach out, schedule a call, find out if mediation is right for you. And if not, we'll let you know, direct you to some resources. So
Awesome. Well, I cannot thank you enough. I think you dispelled so many myths and rumors, and I just love how you have such a heart for children, family wellness, and just not losing your mind. And as you said, being an adult. And folks can obviously, of course, go to that website. But if you forgot what the heck Joe just said, in the show notes at the bottom of the description, however you're listening to this, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, iHeartRadio, Pandora, there'll be that website. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Four Peaks Parents newsletter. It's completely free, and it is right to your inbox with tons of tips, tools, and strategies to help you navigate this crazy thing called parenting. So hope everyone has an amazing day. Keep on keeping on, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care and be well. Thank you so much, Joe.
thanks, Thomas.
Hey everyone, Thomas here. First off, it means the world to me that you took the time to listen to my podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, if you want to receive the latest podcast updates, as well as expert parenting tips and practical strategies for navigating your tween, teen, or young adults challenges directly to your inbox, then sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the description. And most importantly, if you're tired of feeling overwhelmed, stuck, stressed, and are losing sleep because you're constantly worried about your tween, teen, or young adult, your first step is to realize that you still have a choice and can do something about it. I'm ready to help you take action and create the results you desire today. Just go to fourpeaksparents.com and book a free strategy call. Let's do this. Last thing, while you were listening to this show, who was the one person that you thought could really benefit from hearing it? Please share it with them.